When Julia Renner stepped into the grand foyer of the Bellamy estate, the smell of polished mahogany and fading lilies struck her like a memory she had no right to carry. It had been 18 years. 18 years since her mother had died in silence, a secret clutched in her hand. 18 years since Julia learned that the man she thought was a stranger, a businessman from old money and colder morals, was actually her father, Charles Bellamy, founder of Bellamy Industries, philanthropist, father of one publicly, Celeste, blonde, perfect, a graduate of Cambridge and heir to everything the Bellamy name represented. Julia had watched her from a distance for years. Magazine covers, interviews, charity galas, the golden daughter with the golden life. While Julia worked 2 jobs, buried her mother, and tried to forget the bloodline that had rejected her. But secrets don't stay buried. Not when they're written in a will. When Charles Bellamy died, Julia didn't expect to be mentioned, but she was. To my daughter Julia Renner, yes. My daughter, I leave a single key to the blue study. She will know what to do. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a key. And now, she was standing in the house she was never allowed to enter, with Bellamy's second family watching her like a crack in their perfect portrait. Celeste greeted her with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You've come for the key." Julia held it up between 2 fingers. "I've come for the truth." The blue study was locked, untouched since Charles died. Even Celeste hadn't dared enter. She claimed it was his sanctuary, but Julia knew better. Secrets always had locks, and this one had waited for her inside. The room was frozen in time. Deep navy walls, heavy curtains, a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. And on the desk, a single envelope, her name written in thick strokes. "Julia, you were never meant to be forgotten. But the price of truth was too high when I met your mother. I gave you silence so I could give you safety. But I see now that safety became a prison. I can't undo what I denied you. But I can give you something better, your place. Behind the fireplace panel, you'll find documents, originals, proof, and leverage. The company was never meant to be Celeste's. She was my daughter in name, yes, but not in blood." That was her mother's lie. "You were the only thing I did right. Take back what's yours." CB Julia stared at the letter, heart pounding. Celeste wasn't his daughter, and everything, the company, the name, the wealth, had been built on a lie. She moved to the fireplace, slid open the hidden panel. Inside were notarized papers, paternity tests, and a revised version of the will that had never been submitted. One that named Julia Renner as sole heir and successor of Bellamy Industries. The dates matched. The signatures were real. The silence broke. She laughed once, bitter and short. Her whole life she had felt like a mistake. Now she knew. She was the truth. And the Bellamys? They had stolen everything. Julia didn't confront them right away. Revenge, she knew, wasn't about shouting in hallways or public outrage. It was about pulling threads quietly, methodically, until the whole tapestry unraveled and the liars were left tangled in the ruin they built. She made copies of everything from the hidden compartment, the paternity test, the alternate will, and especially the letters between Charles Bellamy and his private solicitor. Letters where Charles admitted the truth: Celeste was not his biological daughter, and Julia was the rightful heir. She took it all to Annabel Drake, a discreet and ruthless legal consultant who specialized in legacy redirection. A polite way of saying she cleaned up rich people's mistakes. Annabel read the documents in silence. When she finally looked up, her eyes glittered. "You know this will blow a hole straight through their legacy?" "That's the plan," Julia said. Annabel nodded. "You'll need more than paper. You'll need the court of public opinion. I don't want their pity." "You don't need pity. You need visibility. If Celeste and her mother built this legacy on fraud, we let the right people know. Quietly, discreetly, but just loud enough that everything starts to slip." Within a week, Julia was quietly added to the shareholder directory of Bellamy Industries, under a pending claim. No public announcement, just a name tucked into a page no one expected. Then came the audit request. Annabel filed it anonymously with the board of directors, citing irregularities in the succession documents. Nothing concrete, just enough to make them nervous. That was when Celeste noticed. She stormed into the blue study one afternoon, flanked by her mother, Victoria, in a pearl-colored suit and a face like carved ice. "You're trespassing," Celeste said flatly. Julia sat at the desk, sipping coffee from her father's old mug. "I have the key," she replied calmly. "He left it to me, remember?" Victoria stepped forward. "I don't know what you think you've found, but you have no right to be here." "No." Julia stood, sliding the paternity test across the desk. "Then explain this." Celeste's expression didn't change, but her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the paper. She didn't need to read it. She already knew. "You've been living a lie," Julia said softly. "I just stepped into the truth." Victoria reached for the paper, but Julia stopped her with one sentence. "There's more, and it's already with my lawyer." Silence. The kind of silence that follows an explosion, soundless but irreversible. Julia leaned closer, her voice ice. "You should have never let me in the house. You thought I'd come looking for scraps, but I came to reclaim my name." That night, the board of Bellamy Industries met in emergency session. Celeste tried to maintain control. She gave a speech impassioned, poised about loyalty, vision, legacy, but it fell flat. The board had seen the documents, heard whispers. Some even remembered Charles' last weeks, when he grew withdrawn, secretive, distant from Celeste and her mother. Now they knew why. The board didn't remove Celeste. Not yet. But they did one thing that mattered far more. They froze her authority. No decisions, no deals, no media appearances, until further investigation. For a woman used to running the show, it was a public slap. Julia didn't gloat. She simply watched. She wasn't done yet. In the days that followed, Julia moved quietly through the estate, sorting, archiving, absorbing the world that should have always been hers. She found a letter from her mother, tucked behind a portrait. "In the East Corridor. Julia, I told him the day you were born, but he was afraid of what it would mean for you. I let him go because I thought it would keep you safe. But you were never meant to be hidden. You are his daughter in every way that matters. If you ever find this, it means the truth has come home. Take it, carry it, but don't let it turn you cold. Love always." Mom, she cried for the first time, not because of pain, but because for the first time, she didn't feel like a mistake. She felt like a Bellamy. Celeste, meanwhile, unraveled, with her power frozen. She couldn't spin her narrative. The press began sniffing. Bellamy heiress challenged by secret daughter ran on the back pages of 2 major business publications. Julia didn't speak to journalists. She didn't need to. She let the story write itself. Annabelle prepared a formal succession challenge backed by Charles's alternate will, witness statements, and the damning paternity records. Once submitted to court, it would trigger a public hearing. It would end Celeste's reign for good. But Julia paused. She stood on the balcony of the estate her father had built, watching the garden her mother never got to see, and she asked herself, "What do I want?" She already had the house, the truth, the board's attention. Celeste's fall had already begun, but her mother's words echoed. "Don't let it turn you cold." Maybe she didn't want ruin, maybe she wanted legacy. But legacy with her name. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the soft hum of the overhead lights. Julia sat poised, composed, her fingers laced gently in her lap. Celeste sat opposite her, jaw tight, lips pressed into a line of reluctant elegance. Their legal teams flanked them like warring generals, but the real battle had already been won behind closed doors. The succession challenge had gone public, the alternate will, the paternity test, the letters, everything had been authenticated and submitted through the proper legal channels, and now the world knew. Julia Renner was not just a name. She was the true daughter of Charles Bellamy. Celeste wasn't. The judge's ruling didn't come with drama or outrage. It was quiet, measured, inevitable. In light of the submitted documentation and lack of contestation, the court hereby recognizes Julia Renner as the legitimate biological child of Charles Bellamy and accepts the validity of the alternate will submitted in his final months. The estate and primary ownership rights of Bellamy Industries will be transferred accordingly. A gavel, a signature, a verdict. Just like that. The mask shattered. Celeste didn't cry. She didn't scream, but as she stood to leave, shoulders stiff and steps slow, Julia caught the faintest glint of something Celeste had never shown her before. Fear. The kind of fear born not from losing power but from knowing the world would never look at you the same again. That evening, Julia walked the halls of Bellamy House alone. She didn't celebrate. No champagne, no toast. Just silence. The portraits of Charles, of old founders, of half-smiling men in stiff suits. She walked past them all until she reached the North Gallery, the place Charles used to keep his mother's art. She added a single photograph to the collection. Black and white, soft focus. A candid shot of her mother, young, vibrant, laughing on a park bench. A woman erased from legacy, now given a wall of her own. Under it, she placed a small brass plaque. For the one who was never invited in but built the foundation anyway. Celeste, predictably, disappeared from public life. Whispers floated that she had taken a sabbatical in Florence, perhaps Paris. She kept the Bellamy name for now, but her authority, her stake in the company, her credibility were all stripped bare. But Julia didn't erase her dot in a private letter delivered by hand. Julia offered her cousin a quiet deal. You may keep the townhouse in London. The trust fund will remain untouched, but you will sign a public resignation from the board. You will not contest the new leadership, and in return, I will not pursue charges of fraud or perjury related to the original will's suppression. Celeste's response was short. You've won. Do with it what you will. And she signed dot in the weeks that followed. Julia took up residence not just in the house, but in the boardroom. At her first official shareholders meeting, she stood in the center of the room, not behind the long oak desk, but in front of it. She addressed the men and women who had once dismissed her as a footnote. I am not here to polish a legacy. I'm here to rewrite one, she said. This company was built on half-truths and hollow image. My father believed in power. I believe in purpose. And if we want to survive the next century, we will build not on secrets but on transparency. There was silence, then applause, slow but genuine. And in that moment, she knew she didn't just belong. She led. Julia reinstated forgotten staff, reopened grants her father had ignored. She funded youth entrepreneurship programs, launched a foundation in her mother's name, and began quietly shifting the focus of Bellamy Industries from corporate real estate to sustainable urban development, not because it was marketable, but because it mattered. The spring air smelled like fresh paper and old stone as Julia walked through the Bellamy campus courtyard. A new building was rising beside the old headquarters, a sleek, modern structure with glass walls and bronze trim, surrounded by green rooftops and community gardens. At its base, a brass sign had just been installed. The Renner Center for Legacy Leadership, founded in honor of Emma Renner, the woman behind the truth. Julia stood before it for a long while, her reflection ghosting in the mirrored doors. Everything had changed in a year. She had gone from forgotten name to rightful heir, from outsider to leader, from illegitimate daughter to legacy architect. But none of it had come easy, and none of it had been without cost. Inside the estate, her footsteps no longer echoed in fear or shame. They moved with purpose, with memory, with quiet dignity. She didn't need to erase the Bellamy name. She had expanded it, transformed it. Where once there were rooms locked in silence, now there were voices of artists, of interns, of visiting scholars. The house was no longer a monument to a cold man's image. It was a place that breathed again. One morning, while sorting through the archives, Julia found an old voice recording. It was her father's, captured during a private dictation session in the final weeks of his life. If Julia ever hears this, I hope she knows I was afraid. Afraid of what it meant to acknowledge the life I created outside the image I sold to the world. But I see now, legacy isn't what people say when you die, it's what your children do with the truth when you're gone. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. She deserved more than silence, more than a locked door. And if she ever takes this place, God, I hope she makes it something better than I ever could. Julia listened to it twice. Then she filed it, not to forget it, but to anchor it. Because in the end, Charles Bellamy hadn't left her with money or apologies. He had left her with the truth, and she had made that enough. Celeste never returned to the estate. She sent one more letter, brief, brittle. I used to think power was something you inherited. Now I know it's something you either build or break. I hope you build. But don't expect me to watch. Julia folded the note and tucked it into the back of her journal. Not out of sentimentality, but out of respect. Celeste had lost. But she wasn't her enemy anymore. She was just another daughter raised by shadows. At the gallery's reopening event in the new Renner Center, Julia stood at the podium in a simple navy dress. She didn't read from notes. I grew up thinking I came from nowhere, she said. But I've learned that truth has its own inheritance. My mother raised me with grace. My father left me with silence. But in that silence, I found something powerful. The freedom to write a new story. She paused, scanning the crowd. I'm not here because of the Bellamy name. I'm here in spite of it. And today, I don't stand as someone who took back what was hers. I stand as someone who built what was never given. The applause was thunderous, but Julia didn't smile for the crowd. She smiled for her mother, for herself, for the little girl who once watched a world from behind a glass door and believed she would always be on the outside looking in. That girl had become the woman who now opened doors for others, not with vengeance, but with vision.